depending where you are. Welcome to our webinar. We are actually joined by a wonderful group of folks. Sorry that you are seeing my other screens. Let's see, how do I get this thing going? So what we're doing here today is talking about transitioning your marketing and customer experience strategies to go digital, and some of the experiences that we have from this year's Adobe Summit. I'm joined here by four distinguished folks. First one is Paul Greenberg from the 56 Group. Say hello, Paul.
Hey, everyone.
We got Peter Kim, our Chief Strategy Officer.
Hello.
And we got Natalie Petouhoff, who is our lead analyst looking at customer experience and customer engagement.
Hello, everybody.
And you're stuck with me as well. You can follow us on our Twitter handles as listed below, and then, of course, ask any questions as you can on the dashboard and in the GoToWebinar controls or in the questions there. So we'll be following that on Twitter as well as following here. You can use the hashtag CRChat to follow along. We're going to start by really talking about what's happening in terms of digital and where we're headed, really talking about the big shifts that are going on. And as many of you know, and you've probably seen this slide, 52% of the Fortune 500 firms have either been merged, acquired, gone away, gone bankrupt, or fallen off the list since 2000. This is a rapid pace of change that's happening in the marketplace, and a lot of this is attributed to digital. And we are entering this age of digital that's coming together from things that happened in social, things that happened in the internet, things that went to mobile, cloud, big data, and also what's happening in digital. And you see, these pillars are actually just more than a technology shift. We are actually facing what we're calling a digital transformation as we create new business models. And this is happening very quickly, and what we really want to do now is really talk about that impact of this digital transformation in terms of what's happening to customer experience, digital marketing, and commerce, and looking at what we saw, what trends that we're seeing, and a lot of that coming from Adobe Summit. So I'd actually like to start with asking a question for Paul, really about what's happening in the bigger scope of what's going on in customer experience and CRM. Paul, you've been known as the godfather of CRM. You also serve on the board of advisors for us. You've been helping with the CRM Evolution Conference for years. You've written, is it 5 editions now of CRM at the Speed of Light?
4. Never
4, okay. Never a 5th? You said never a 4th last time I saw you.
That's true.
So what's happening? What are some of those larger trends that are starting here with digital transformation and CRM and where we're headed to customer experience?
Well, you know, what we're actually seeing, which is the most interesting, is you're seeing the sort of the extension of what's been going on for almost 10 years. I mean, if you go back to the beginning, what you saw first and foremost was a communications revolution that transformed how we communicate, what we expect of communications, who we trust, the real-time expectation, meaning how quickly we expect response, etc. But it also transformed how we create and distribute and consume information. All of that changed over the last 10 years, and we see a constant evolution. For a while, the way we looked at it was we saw a significant minority of customers on the business side who actually said, all right, you know what, I am going to communicate with thousands and maybe millions of other people who are like me. They're not necessarily people I know, but people who I feel are like me, and they're going to respond to me because they feel they're like I am too. And that was what we used to call the social customer. And at the time, it was, again, a significant minority. Now we've seen that actually transform to what we're now pretty much calling a digital customer. And what that actually means explicitly is really the bulk of customers now are communicating on channels, including social channels. But it could be email, and it could be traditional channels too. But they're communicating on multiple channels in any given day in the way they want to communicate, using the channel they want to communicate at the time, and their expectations for each of those channels is pretty much the expectation that they have of the most advanced of them, meaning if it's a social channel that they're getting, let's say, an hour response time on a customer service issue, or they're responding to a salesperson in some way, and he responds back in 15 minutes, they're expecting that in every channel. And the digital customer is conversant with this. So this has transformed everything. It's transformed everything about CRM, transformed everything about customer experience, and transformed everything about customer engagement. And really, that's where we're looking at it. I mean, customer experience really is how the customer is feeling over time about any given institution, in this case, business. What we're really seeing is where customer engagement's changed. And what that means now is that we're looking at companies being put in position where in order to get the value that they need as companies from the customers, they've got to do far more than they ever did. They can't just provide decent service and good products or anything like that. Now they have to provide product, services, tools, and what I call consumable experiences that are in an ongoing fashion, so that the customer gets to choose how they want to engage with the company. This is a dramatic transformation. We're talking about a majority of customers, and you can just go on and Google stats all you want on how customers are participating in varying channels that are digital now, and you'll see the numbers you always see are 93%, 90%, 88%, 91%, meaning the bulk of customers now operate that way. So we've seen a fundamental transformation in who the customer is, how they work, and where they work, and what they expect. And we've seen the necessary changes, or the beginning of necessary changes by business in order to get the value that they need.
Now, Paul, this is really this broader piece where we're talking about this continuous customer experience or continuous customer engagement as people are going through this continuum of different experiences. Natalie, you look at customer engagement, customer experience. You teach at UCLA. You've been a former Forrester analyst. You've worked in the agency side. You've done all these different pieces around this. I mean, what are these shifts? I mean, how's digital transforming those experiences and for your customers and clients that you've been talking to?
Well, you know what's really interesting, Ray, is that there's this saying about marketing is customer service and customer service is marketing. And I really see a big shift in what we're going to call those roles. And a really good example from the Adobe conference was the MGM brand. And they have multi-brand, multi-products. It's really an international brand from Bellagio to Circus Circus. 19 resorts, $19 billion in revenue, 65 million guests, over 47,000 rooms, 250 food and beverage little stations, 350 retail stores. So it's an interesting microcosm of stores, of food, of customer experience. And one of the things that he talked about, John, who is the SVP and Chief Digital Officer at the resorts, was this idea of being able to embrace the customer through digital. And one of the things that he admitted and he talked about, which I thought was really important, is this need to look at where we are in the analog world, like mailers and magazines, and how we've always been communicating, and then everybody jumped on this bandwagon with websites and apps and all these different things. And he said, you know, they're really looking at how do they use technology to, one, transition, still use some of that analog stuff, but also
analog doesn't go away?
Analog doesn't completely go away, because there's some parts of the demographic that may still enjoy that, according to him. And this may differ for your particular industry, but it's something to think about is, what are you doing in analog? What are you doing in digital? And how are you transitioning that? And he talked about, if you look at every single guest, are they going to, through that experience, whether it's digital or analog, are they going to become an advocate or a detractor? And the whole thing really is about making a personalized, integrated experience, whether someone's viewing, you know, when they walk into the guest room, and there's usually turn on the TV, and the first TV channel is something about the resort itself, and then there's an app to log into, and then there's slot machines. And he said what they really want to do is they want to be able to make the digital and analog in-person experiences easy to interact with and to have the same guest feel, and to do that at scale. And so this is not an easy thing. So whether you're a large company or a small company, I think one of the biggest things for marketers is looking at whatever brand promise you're creating, to make sure that you're communicating with customer service so that that brand promise can be delivered on, and then getting feedback about what's working and what's not working, and then reshape those messages in those touch points, and making sure that they're really as easy as we hope them to be. It's kind of coming from the engineering world way back when. It's like getting your toy car that you just built to drive it and see, you know, if it rides smoothly. See if the tires go flat after a mile. Just
Hey,
really.
Natalie, that's a great point, Natalie. I mean, we're going from building products to keeping brand promises and really making sure that we look at both the digital and the analog world as we get there. Now, I want to get Pete in here as well. Pete, you've been the chief strategy officer at Adobes. You've been different roles at agencies. You've been in other executive positions. You've been in the front lines of actually doing this. You've been a Forrester analyst. You've actually been on the brand side. What changes in digital marketing then? Right? I mean, Paul's talked about this engagement, continuous customer cycle that's changing, how this is actually a big shift. Natalie's talking about analog, digital, where this convergence is happening, and really how to keep this brand promise. What goes on in marketing? What happens in the future of marketing when this occurs?
Yeah, Ray, I think based on touching on what Paul said and what Natalie said, these changes are coming right in time because with the rise of social media and the idea that customers are in control, I mean they're really not, but that's we've had to push towards that line just to get brands to rethink about what does it mean to actually engage with consumers rather than just push messages at them. Expectations have never been higher, right? So implementing new CRM systems, thinking about holistic customer experience is something that brands, it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have, given the way that the landscape has evolved. So what we see is that consumer expectations have risen dramatically with the age of digital and with the continuing push forward of the consumerization of IT, not only in the workplace but also in personal lives. Digital is being pervasive across everything. We see that the consumers are pushing for change. We see the vendors reacting and understanding that they've got to deliver better solutions that cut across organizational silos, that help provide data and use cases like single customer view that can be applied omni-channel, so both online and offline. But the problem that we've got is that many brands are still stuck with these ideas of how brand marketing should work or has worked. If you think about it, the concept of brand management isn't a natural law like the law of gravity. It's a business construct that was invented in the mid-20th century, and yet a lot of great brands still espouse that idea as the way that they should be organized. So what we're seeing is that consumers are changing, tech is changing, but marketers are having a little bit of struggle actually retooling their processes and reaching across the silos to the CIO and CFO to actually create the bridges that are going to enable them to deliver on holistic customer experience.
No, great points there, Pete. And I think on my end, looking at commerce, right, we're seeing the same thing as well. Right, matrix commerce is really looking at all the different channels, how they come together, where demand signals are coming from marketing or from customer service, from customer experience, or from sales, and where you bring those demand signals into play and figure out, hey, do we have the supply chains? Can we actually deliver on these goods? Where does big data come into play? How do we tie this together back with the campaign, or back with a sales call, or back with a service interaction? And so it looks like, I mean, from these conversations and what you're saying for Paul and Pete and Natalie, what we're really talking about is there's massive convergence. It's like almost we're recreating CRM again, right? Commerce, sales, service, marketing, support, all coming together in this digital world. What do you guys think? Natalie, is this happening?
Well, here's what I think. I think if we're really truly honest, the promises and the ideas of 20 years ago when I was a systems integrator and we sold customers, we sold them the ideas that we're actually able to implement now. And I don't think that there was any harm or foul meant back then, and I think we really wanted to be able to do it. But if you look at the transformation of technology and the ability to implement it and to actually connect things, the advent of SaaS, not having to have a SOA layer, I think we're much, much closer to actually being able to deliver on the promise. And so this time, and it's hard, right? Because if you're a marketer and you're listening to this, you've been promised this so many times. And
I know, I don't believe you anymore.
I don't believe myself anymore, right? It's like, are you kidding me? Yeah, you're going to do all that. Oh, sure. And I think the buyers are very, very confused. When I was in the agency world, I watched the buyers just kind of, somebody get up and pitch them, and I would watch them just shrink back in their seat and kind of shake their head, and they were IMing back and forth, going, "Oh, this guy's full of baloney." And it's
So
because
Paul, are you
a
seeing
lack
that
of
too?
trust.
Paul, are you seeing that too? Is the technology caught up, or are we still in hype and dream mode and back to one-to-one marketing and 360-degree customer reviews? Wow! Or is this real this time?
Well, it's better. That's the best way to put it. If we're dealing with just the technology piece of it, it's considerably better. But I mean, just for an example, you know, if you remember, the 360-degree view was the holy grail of CRM for many, many years, and to some extent it's now just table stakes. But even with it as table stakes, you're talking about at least as recently as about a year and a half ago, which is the last time I saw a number, only 38% of the Fortune 1000 even had a 360-degree view of the customer. So, you know, while the technology itself is pretty advanced, the execution on it isn't as advanced. I mean, there's a lot of good intent. There's a lot of good discussion. It's beyond hype. It's at the point where, for example, discussions of, let's call it omnichannel, as Peter mentioned, even though I think all of us agree it's a terrible word, right?
You're making our colleague, our friend Esteban, like sure his ears are probably like shrinking right now.
Oh, I hate the word.
At this moment.
I hate the word, but it's the only word we have for it. But with things like omnichannel are now possible because of technology, and people are actually doing things like that. You know, but the whole nature of it's sort of an analogy. Like about 10 years ago, they announced down here a change in. They needed to build a widening of a place down by Springfield, Springfield, Virginia, on Route 95, and because traffic was so bad, and it took them 7 years to actually build it, and they built it over 7 years. There's traffic backing up horribly for 7 years, and finally they built it. But by that time, things had grown so much that there's still a lot of traffic. But without it, it would have even been worse. We're kind of in that situation now, meaning the technology, so to speak, is actually catching up, but the circumstances and context have changed. So, for example, if you go back and we take a look at it from a standpoint of marketing, you go back to marketing of the era, as Peter put it, with they're pushing messages, that era. The fundamental principles were the 4 Ps. Was it price, place, promotion, and what was the other one?
Product.
Thank you. All right. So those are the 4 Ps. Now, for a world where you were doing that kind of marketing, where it was competitive marketing, that was fine. It was 101 for marketing back then. But that died in 2005 when marketing as a first line of customer engagement would actually, what that means is marketing became something that you did to actually get the attention of a customer, not just competitively, but against 2,999 other messages that they were getting every day, which may have nothing to do whatsoever with whatever products or services or tools you provide. So you were competing for attention, then you were starting to compete at other levels. So even though the technology, which might have been good, and the strategies, which might have been good for a prior era, might have matured, might have evolved, but we came to a point where they were no longer all that useful. Now the technology is starting to catch up with that. In fact, that's why the value of digital marketing is that it's catching up with the idea of attention.
So the volumes and scale of campaigns and information and data and just even keeping up, right, means you got to get to digital, but even then you might be behind when we start, is what you're saying.
Well, again, this is how you execute, not so much the technology itself. The technologies are dumb, right? They don't do anything other than what you make them do. They have limits. Basically, you're dealing with something that does something and is constrained and can't do other things. And ultimately, you have to decide what it is you want to extract from it so that you get an outcome that you're looking for. And that's really what the value of the technology is. Technologies probably have the ability to do what you want, but how you execute is dependent on so many things other than the technology that you can't really apply just that alone to how you're defining this thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And Pete, you've been in the field, right, for the last 2 to 3 years, at various agencies, working with customers on those strategies, thinking through what's happening. Is this the same thing? Is that resonating with you, or are customers just finally catching up to the promise and the ideas? Are they sorely disappointed? And we'll do that before we jump into lessons learned from Adobe Summit. So go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, it's actually been about 5 or 6 years, and I think that seeing that change is that we're getting there, but then of course new questions are emerging around privacy, security, Heartbleed recently, Target around the holiday shopping season, so it's we're getting there, the systems are advancing, but again, a lot of new questions are emerging that we didn't have to consider before, so it's not all easy going. And I wonder, I guess, back to the future, do we call this, maybe this is a better question for the end, but I just have to throw it out now, are we going to call this CRM 3.0? Because I think we're at 2.0 with social CRM, but it didn't stick. So I'll have that sitting in my head as we go through the rest of this hour. So.
Paul, Natalie, 3.0 or no 3.0? What do you think?
You want to answer first, Natalie?
I think that it goes back to the old days of people, process, and technology, and really strong leadership, understanding what it is that we're trying to do, and the separation of, the CEO. The CEO's got to get on board. They got to understand the technology at least enough to be able to help make the right decisions. IT used to buy technology. Now the CMO is buying technology. Does that make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense. I really think a lot of this stuff is and has always come down to organizational management and change management. And Paul's right, the technology does stuff, it does some stuff, it doesn't do some stuff. You need to know what that stuff is. You need to know what business metrics you're trying to move, and then you need to figure out who's responsible, who's going to report.
But is this CRM 3.0? Is this CRM 3.0 or not? Should we name it 3.0 or not? Lightning round, you get 5 seconds.
No, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet.
All right, no. I say no too. Pete, no or yes? Or are you still contemplating?
Sorry, I was on mute there. No, I'm just joking. 80% with that one for sure. So.
All right, cool. We're gonna move on. We're gonna move to Adobe Summit, right? We were there 2 weeks ago. Adobe put on their big show. It was the old Omniture show. They've come back really with a whole marketing suite, marketing cloud. I think a lot of us had one-on-ones. We had different sessions. They wound up with awesome graphics, great messages, good conversations. What did you come back with? What did you learn? Like, what changed about that show for you? I'm going to start with you, Pete. Right? What's changed about Adobe, and what did you walk away thinking? Where would I use Adobe with our customers?
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of different parts to Adobe based on. To your point, the summit was in Salt Lake City, so it's the cradle of the old Omniture business. And then of course you've got the legacy Adobe business more out of San Jose and Silicon Valley. So it was great to see how all the pieces come together in terms of one big marketing cloud. Of course, paired up with what Adobe calls the Creative Cloud, which is their desktop creative applications. And then this, one thing that I thought was pretty interesting was this idea of a master marketing profile, which, to be frank, is new for Adobe, but it's also essentially CRM, right? So if you're coming at this from a different perspective, this is not going to be news to a lot of marketers or to a lot of their competitors. So I think it's interesting to see the parts come together, but also really when you start to think about broadly who buys this and why does it matter, you start to see a lot of competition out there for this integrated suite. And the big question in my mind is who's actually going to buy this whole thing, and how soon is it until the market is ready for one-stop shopping when it comes to this overall integrated marketing platform versus all the different parts that have been pieced together. So.
Paul, what are you saying? What did you walk away with? Different Adobe, new Adobe? Where do they sit? Well, I mean, it's a different. Adobe's making themselves a player in the marketing world. I'm not 100% sold that they're going to succeed at it yet. I think that they're a serious contender. I mean, here, look, if you would ask me this question 3 or 4 years ago, they were pushing on the idea of the customer experience market. Now, look, customer experience is obviously a core principle of everything that we talk about and what we do, but it's not a marketplace, right? And the thing is that they were pushing very hard with their customer experience products and so on. And I had a conversation with them that was, let's put it this way, a big waste of time a few years ago. Wasted my time, and I rarely think that, but it was that bad a conversation. Then, you know, I started watching them, and I started paying attention to them nonetheless, because they are Adobe. And, you know, historically, if you think about them, they decided they wanted to be the printing language of record, and they developed PostScript. They decided they wanted to be the document format of record, and they developed PDF. You know, and they really did an amazing job doing that. They actually chose to do that, and they succeeded at doing it, so you can't ever write them off. The biggest thing for me was that seeing what they've begun doing with Neolane, interestingly enough. Neolane has always been a quality product. It's not like they did any one thing spectacularly well, but they did everything well. Not great, well, but everything well. And they did everything. And they acquired Neolane for, I think it was $600 million, which is honestly a good deal. And the thing that fascinated me at the summit, because this is the first one I ever attended, was that they actually have integrated Neolane really well. They've done a terrific job of integration so far. I mean, what they've done of it has been excellent. And you know, they've rebranded it as Adobe Campaign, and they've got some of the traditional, you know, marketing automation that they need to go along with the digital assets that they have. And that was a big deal also, because ultimately, if you're going to succeed with the idea of a marketing cloud, and you're calling it a marketing cloud, you have to have the traditional operational marketing stuff, like marketing automation, campaign management being kind of the #1 feature. They have always been very strong on the, you know, Adobe Target with the testing and the analytics and that side, and Omniture, you know, that side. They've been strong. The integration of campaign management, along with their creative assets, give them a real opportunity to go somewhere. They're still missing pieces. You know, they're missing marketing resource management, and since the enterprise is a market that they target, that's really mission critical that they're going to have to get it at some point. I don't want to say it's mission critical, it's important. They're going to have to do more on the traditional side, you know, and which is just better integration of Neolane, which I know they're doing, and they told us that they were going to announce more in the summer. And then they need some loyalty advocacy kind of marketing stuff. They need that. The other thing they need badly, and this is part I thought they fell down dramatically. Let me back up. The other thing they did I thought was a good move, if they expand it, was their alliance with SAP, with Hybris in particular. But I think they need to expand it to a broader SAP alliance, because SAP's overall weakness is exactly what Adobe's strength is in marketing. And SAP actually has some of the pieces that Adobe doesn't, although I don't know how that's going to work. But it's a good alliance if it expands further. That's another area. Finally, though, the one thing I think that they severely suffered from was their messaging. I thought was just awful. I think they did some really good storytelling, like the MGM Grand story, like Sephora, like REI, like the Richard Sherman video with Eric Stone Street on being a social media expert, which was hilarious. You know, some of their commercial. I mean, their storytelling was terrific. But where they just fell down dramatically was their messaging. I mean, I heard messaging like, it's all about people, which that's like 1999 CRM message, right? Nobody even says that anymore without sounding like a time-worn cliche, right? And then the second thing is that they pushed this idea, and this was the worst, to be honest, of the 3 Ps: people, process, and product. Aside from the fact that's one of the 4 Ps is in there, and they left out a 4th P, which was one that's most important to them, which is personalization. Even associating the word 3 Ps with anything that they're talking about, it makes them look like the legacy tool company that they still are evolving from. they still need to get past that. They still need to make that to become really serious. Luckily, on a product strategy side, they have, Suresh Vidal is going to run product for them. So that's great. He's former Neil and former Forrester, I think, too. I mean, you're talking about a really good guy there. So they've got some good stuff here. But they've also got a lot of legacy baggage to dump yet, and they need to dump it. They don't have a lot of time because IBM acquired Silverpop, as we know. So what does that tell you about IBM and a possible marketing cloud coming from them at some point soon, and one that is focused around personalization?
It's called Unica was too hard to use.
Right, exactly.
but I wanted to stick in 2 P's, right? I want to stick in passion and purpose, but to those 3 P's. But I'm sure we could come up with a few more. So Natalie, what do you think? Right? What do you walk out with?
Well, here's what I love what Paul said, and you're right. Talking about people sounds like so 1999, but that's because I think those of us who have been in the CRM world have been talking about this for 25 years, and now marketers who have traditionally been pushers, right? They have been pushing content out. It was never their role, right? It was never their role to interact. Customer service interacted. CRM was an interaction or at least a transaction tool. And so marketers are discovering people. And so now they're saying people are important. And so if you look at it historically, they're just coming to something that is new to them but is old to us. So it makes them sound a bit antiquated. But I think that most marketers are really starting to embrace the idea that marketing is a two-way conversation, and it requires people to have those conversations, and you can't just have technology to push out a marketing automation campaign. So I think that they're catching up themselves to a new world where their role is completely changing. I think most marketers are a little bit confused about their role. They're confused about what it is that they're doing. Are they really, if your lead conversion rate, aren't you a salesperson? If you look at most of the calls that come into a call center, they're like, well, I want to know how this works. Is that that's not a call like, this thing that I bought is broken, please fix it. That's what we traditionally think of as customer service. Half the calls that come into call centers are really marketing calls that push people over the edge to buy something. So I think there's this new Adobe Marketing Cloud, and it's got analytics and campaign and experience management and media optimizer and social and targeting. It's got all these pieces, but I think the marketer themselves has to redefine who they are, perhaps maybe as the chief revenue officer, if they're using big data, the chief big data officer, and to really begin to figure out how they want to play at the senior executive team level. And then anytime you have a shift in any role, that means all the other roles are shifting. And again, to the fish stinks most of the head, which means leadership really needs to decide how they're going to run their ship and how they're going to turn their ship in this new kind of very choppy water. And it's there's a lot of roadblocks, but there's lots of opportunity.
One of the things that I found walking out of the event was that there was so much interest in commerce. Right. I mean, these have been folks that have been focused on the data, the analytics pieces. These are folks that have been tying back their content strategies, and then suddenly, like all the, you think about Elastic Path, you think about Intershop, you think about the SAP Hybris announcement. I mean, that final connection to commerce. It's as if, if you think about the classic campaign to lead, that's a part where everybody else does. Adobe's had that creative to campaign. They're now able to go from creative to commerce. Right, and I think that's the footprint that they might be shooting for, which is saying, look, we can go take you end to end from this point of view, starting with that base on creative and working there all the way to actually selling something. Paul, you seen that as well, the creative to commerce piece?
Yeah, actually, that's their real power. I mean, the thing that's fascinating always to me about Adobe is they've always had that part. And it's interesting. If you look, they're a technology company. Let's face it, and that, and their interest is in selling technology. They're not a strategy company. They're not going to develop, they have their own strategies, but they're not developing strategies for marketing people. They're not, they're not a Accenture or even a creative agency. So, but the one thing that Adobe's always done really well is provide the tools for the people who are doing the creative work. And now we're starting to see that translate. Look, I mean, you have to start from a certain interesting perspective that actually Peppers and Rogers are the first, at least I saw publicly voice this about 5 years ago, which was around the alignment of marketing and sales, right? And they're saying for the first time in history, and that's why we're hearing all this, you know, the revenue conversations around marketing now, is because of this alignment, you know, which is for the first time ever the objectives, not the departments, but the objectives of the departments were being aligned, and that, you know, some of the way that manifested itself was marketers would be given revenue objectives. So the idea of sales and you know, at a B2C level or B2B, but the idea of sales became very important to marketing because actually they were being, you know, and effectively their compensation was starting to depend on it. Marketers' compensation was starting to depend on sales being successful, and we've seen it manifest itself multiple ways. You know, around sales specialization, for example. All of a sudden, you're seeing companies like, say, Lattice Engines or something coming up with next best action kind of stuff with sales and marketing. You know, so that they can figure out how a marketer and sales will work together to come up with the best possibility of drawing in leads and making them opportunities and bringing them to closure. You know, that's one aspect. The other side we're starting to see is the interesting kind of intersection between the agencies and the technology companies, you know, which have begun to grow. And it hasn't succeeded in a lot of places. I mean, you know, I've seen, interestingly enough, you'll see it on the one hand, you'll see it manifests itself around digital transformation. You'll see it manifest itself with organizations like, you know, Accenture or IBM Interactive. You know, the two interactive agencies that are going out and competing with creatives. On the other hand, you'll see a failure, let's say, where Publicis brings in a guy like an Anthony Lai to build a global technology division, and then he can't because there's no money, right, to do it. You know, I mean, because they don't quite get what it really means to do that. You know, so you'll see backs and forths, you'll see failures and successes, but the interesting thing is the intersection of the two, that the agencies are realizing that the customer-facing technologies, engagement technologies, you know, are an important aspect of the assets that they can provide to a company when they're developing strategies for those companies. And on the other hand, you're seeing the technology companies looking at competing from the standpoint of on the creative side, but seeing it more from, you know, creative technology, like you know, building kind of user interfaces and user experiences that will benefit the customers of companies that hire them. And you know, but that puts Adobe in a really interesting place because in effect they're able to sell to both sides. And because there is this convergence, or at least let's say this convergence of interest, I don't want to call it a true convergence because it's not, a convergence of interest between creative and technology companies. Adobe's incredibly well positioned to sell and hit in both areas, and that so when in that regard, this whole idea of creative to commerce, you know, is I know it's not exactly the way you were talking about it, but is not only fascinating, but it's a real potential operating point for Adobe to really just kick some butt, really, and do incredibly well.
Got it. Keith, before you turned into Freddy Krueger, you were saying something very important. What was that? See if we still
hopefully this is a little bit better.
Yeah, you sound much better.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, you know, I think thinking about Adobe's legacy and thinking about where the combination of commerce and marketing, when e-commerce first started to become important within organizations in the late 90s, it was about the same time that people started figuring out digital marketing. But to be frank, traditional marketers and the agencies could really care less about digital and interactive at that time, which is what opened the door for agencies like Razorfish, Organic, you know, CKS Web, and you know, others around that time. So it's not to, again, thinking about legacy structures, we've seen e-commerce stay tied to brand marketing, or digital marketing rather, even as marketing departments have become more, you know, tech savvy, more digital focused. So I think Adobe is certainly well positioned to play in that game, but to a point Paul made earlier about touching on the SAP Hybris deal. Again, when you think about what Adobe controls and what they're focusing on, yeah, they may start to own online marketing, but customer experience is an online and offline place. So then, even if you rule online marketing, well, you're starting to have to compete against the big boys or big girls in IBM, Oracle, and some of those major enterprise players. So, a partnership with SAP may be a nice to have now, but it may be a need to have within the next couple of years.
So taking a page from Greg Gutfield, lightning round, do you think Adobe is in the same league as IBM, Oracle now? Paul, where do you see this?
You mean in the marketing side?
In digital marketing, in this digital space? Well, do you see them as a player?
Right now, well, the problem is you just named, as far as, if you're just talking about IBM and Oracle, the answer is yes. If you're talking about, let's say, Salesforce too, not quite. Right, and if you're talking Oracle doesn't really have its act together yet when it comes to the marketing cloud. They're still trying to get it all together. They have Eloqua, which is a huge positive. Eloqua was a great product, and and it has its holes here and there, but on the whole, it's always been a great product. They just haven't fully integrated it yet, although they will. Judging from what I'm seeing and hearing, they are going to compete seriously well. They've got a really good, let's say, array of assets that they're putting together, including some CRM idle acquisitions like Compendium. They have some really good assets that they're putting together to create the Oracle Marketing Cloud, and they will be a major league contender. IBM, I'm not sold on yet, to be honest. I was never a big fan of Unica. Well, let me rephrase it. I was never a big fan of Unica interface or of what IBM's done or not done with it. The acquisition of Silverpop, which is a week old, so far they haven't done anything with it yet. So we'll see what happens. So I would say, look, Adobe's in not as good a position quite as Oracle, and a better position than IBM.
Sounds good. All right, Pete, lightning round. Where do you put IBM, Oracle, and Adobe in that mix?
Yeah, I think it's. I kind of see it as like the Hunger Games, at the start of the
Hunger
there's
Games
this
of marketing?
prize. Exactly. I mean, there's this prize sitting in the middle, right? And they've got to either partner up and see who makes it there first, in order to own the centralized view of customer data. And I think they're all coming at it from different points of strength and different starting positions. So there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of games still to be played. So they're getting there, but who's in the lead depends on what perspective you take.
Who is Katniss?
How many rounds do we have here?
And I haven't finished reading all the books, so I don't know.
Is there really a Sector 13? Okay. Natalie, lightning round, since I can't keep any of you guys down to 30 seconds. What do you see IBM, Oracle fitting in this, and Adobe?
Well, I think they're really different animals. IBM is a big data company. Oracle is an aggregator. It started out as a relational database, and now it's adding things. And the question will be, will they move from duct taping to really building adopters? And what I've seen is there are a lot of people that are interested in building that because they see Oracle as a huge pipeline. And I think Adobe's roots came from Creative plus Omniture. So whenever you look at the historical footprint of a company, it's what they're really good at, and now they're all adding something. And it's interesting because I had one briefing call, and they said, well, we think we're going to call our suite customer experience. What do you think about that? And I tried not to laugh because I was thinking that I wrote a paper in 2001 called, customer experience, customer as the advocate. And so, again, I think the technology companies have to figure out who they want to be when they grow up, and then we have to have people who are trained to be able to use the technology to get the results out of it, right? Because technology, for technology's sake, is just a bunch of boxes sitting there, and it's not going to help anybody.
All right, so I was going to say this, lightning round. I'll make it easier. Adobe versus Salesforce. Friends, Hunger Game partners, or competitors at birth. So, Pete, I'll start with you.
Oh man, yeah, they're definitely competitors, I'd say. And again, Natalie touched on this. Salesforce coming from that, CRM perspective, and still working to integrate all those parts in what's being called, I think, the exact target marketing cloud now. Adobe coming from that web analytics plus creative, so different perspective, but moving towards the exact same space on the board. So we'll see who gets there first and can box the other one out.
Natalie?
Definitely competitors, definitely are adding pieces to what they don't have. I think they're both being really smart about looking at their deficits, looking at what their historical footprint is, footprint is and what they're good at. The question is leadership, leadership, leadership. Are the leaders living in rarefied air and people blowing wind up their skirt and telling them everything's fine? Or are the leaders open to hearing, here's what's really happening, here's what we really need to do, and we need to get it done now, and we need the people to do it. And that, I think, is what's going to come down to who's going to win the race.
All right, Paul, Salesforce, competitors, partners, or Hunger Games?
Definitely heading right at each other as competitors. They're not identical by a long shot yet, but Adobe's still missing some of the more traditional operational side that they need, which they have with Neil Lane, just not integrated yet. Salesforce is still missing some of the, let's say, the better analytics when it boils down to it on the marketing side. And Salesforce has the one advantage, which is the Exact Target's customer interaction engine, which is a big advantage. So right now, I think Salesforce is still, kind of heading it up there, but which is something I wouldn't have said a year ago before Exact Target. But definite competitors, no question.
Got it. No, it makes a lot of sense. Well, hey, we're going to wrap up soon. We might have some questions, but, can you leave, and I want each of you to go by and leave with like a thought in terms of advice and next steps as people are making this digital journey, looking at it from the marketing, customer experience, or commerce perspective. Let's start with you, Natalie. Like, just a couple things people should think about, and keep it to a minute.
I think people should think about what business goal are they really trying to achieve, what legacy products and technology do they have? Can they do a rip and replace? Are they going to transition? And then who's going to own this? And what kind of organizational structure, when they move to analog to digital, how are they going to work together? How is this collaboration going to happen or not happen? And are we going to really listen to our customers and to our employees and integrate that feedback and do what Deming said 35 years ago, which the more things change, the more they stay the same.
All right, Pete, your take.
Yeah, I think the tech strategy of these vendors is going in the right direction. So I think it behooves the marketing departments to get themselves straightened out and aligned and optimized to take advantage of it. But should they buy into a marketing cloud right now? Unless they've got a penchant for bug fixing and being on the bleeding edge, or they don't have enough budgets, they need a big discount for being an early reference client. I would say go with what you got and wait and see for this stuff to get to fully worked out and integrated on the back end.
Okay, Paul, your point.
All right. If you buy into the idea that marketing is the first line of engagement, and you got to remember something, you're dealing with an actual human being who's being besieged by 3,000 messages a day, which means you've got to capture attention. And one of the best ways to start thinking about marketing is not the way you always thought about it, which is start thinking visual. That's what I say. Start thinking visually. Start thinking about video. Start thinking about using humor. Start thinking about the things that actually capture attention, as opposed to what you think other people at your company might want you to do, right? So visual, 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 humor, 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 all those things that actually capture attention, as opposed to the things that might provide you with some, quote, competitive advantage, unquote.
Hey, Paul, I definitely agree with you. One of the big themes for us into the 2014 in Constellation's Futurist Framework is really mass personalization at scale. I think I'll add to your point, is that folks should start thinking about context so that they can improve relevancy. They shouldn't be thinking about real time. They should be thinking about right time, because that makes things relevant based on context. And more importantly, people should start thinking about where all these data signals and analytics come into play. You always say begin with the end in the mind, and this is an important piece, which is, right, what am I trying to measure, what I'm trying to attribute, what I'm trying to figure out on certain conversions, and how do I make that more relevant to get to that point. So just something on my end. All right, this is great. We think we've got questions. I'm going to check to see Courtney and see if we've got any questions from the audience. Definitely doing Q&A for folks who want to ask questions. Please put it into the GoToMeeting. You can try that on Twitter, hashtag CRChat, and we'll see what's being asked at this moment. We actually have a quick question here. One of the questions here is really coming down to Adobe Summit and comparing that with Dreamforce and comparing that with Oracle's event and comparing that with some of IBM's events. I mean, is there a difference in the audience that you're seeing in terms of like who's showing up? Is it more business, more IT compared to some of the conferences? I'll start with you, Pete. Were you seeing a difference in these conferences in terms of attendee types, level of attendees versus some other conferences?
Yeah, I'm going to take a pass after having been out of the analyst world for a number of years and just getting back into it. What I can say is that these things are becoming full-on experiences though for attendees, given the the content, the entertainment, and of course the sales pitching that's going on before, during, and after. So certainly a different level of sales cycle for B2B, probably to the benefit of everybody involved.
No, that's a great point. We had about 11 clients that were closing deals there. Paul, what do you know? Paul, you're the veteran conference goer. What would you say?
You're the veteran conference goer. I pale by comparison. Well, I mean, it's not actually it's not really a fair comparison because Adobe's is a digital marketing summit, and the others are general user conferences, right? So, it tends to be somewhat different in nature just by the nature of it, So, in that regard, though, to Peter's point, to Pete's point is they're all experiences now. They're all events. They're all spectacles, and the vast majority of them have a policy of being a spectacle, and that's kind of let's make some announcements. Let's get across some points. There is always a significant business audience at these crowds, but there's also a lot of IT people. At the Adobe Summit, I was surprised at how many people were. Only because I hadn't been to one. How many IT or let's say data wonk types were actually at the summit. I thought there would be more marketers than there were. I mean, there were plenty of marketers, but there were also an enormous amount of just hardcore data people who, or at least, the old school kind of database marketer type. There's even a bunch of those. So, the audiences are the nature, based on whatever the summit is going to be the nature of the audience. But the event itself are spectacular. Look, Dreamforce is still number one, the way it's done, everything about it. My wife went to Dreamforce this year, who has nothing to do with the IT world because she wanted to see Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer. And she loved Dreamforce, and she actually registered for next year already. Now think of that. I mean, that's somebody who doesn't care about IT whatsoever, technology whatsoever. So it's the event.
Natalie, your point?
Well, I think we're going from delivering information like in the old days about what's coming up in the product to entertainment. And Dreamforce has definitely gone the distance in terms of entertainment and crossing over into the rest of the world by offering speakers like what Paul just said. And I think the question is, if you work in a company and you have like this day job and a desk and a cubicle, and you get out and you get to go somewhere and you get to have a raging fun time, it really, in a way, creates a brand affinity that is almost subconscious, probably done somewhat on purpose. Last year I went to Clarabridge, and the people were standing cheering. They weren't just sitting in their seats at the end of the speech. They had one of the guys from Shark Tank, and people were standing, cheering. It's really transformed, and the question is, are we really getting business done? Did this just turn into some big break and entertainment piece? And I think that if you're a marketer or an IT person, it's okay to have fun, right? But let's get some business done, and let's get these companies transformed, and let's get this technology implemented so I have something new to write about.
Got it. I was just going to add quickly that to that question, we're seeing the creation of new types of heroes, and people that are emerging in the digital world. And each of these conferences are interesting because we're seeing new types of heroes emerge, folks that are making this all really happen. And I think so all the conferences are celebrating the customers and their achievements. It makes it a lot more interesting. So. Okay, well, hey, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the audience for being participatory, asking questions. I want to thank the panelists that are on here. And, welcome to this Constellation series, really looking at digital marketing and reflections on Adobe Summit. I'm going to quickly have each of the panelists sign off with, something that they're working on or where they're going to be next. So, Paul, what are you writing about next, and what events will we see you at in the next 2 weeks?
Let's start with the latter. I'll be at Icon 14, which is Infusionsoft's conference next week, and then SugarCon immediately after that, and then I have an advisory thing with SAP. I'm working on a couple of things. I can tell you this: my next book is going to be on customer engagement. I'll tell you that, and then something that's being built on right now is on, I'm doing some work on, it's going to sound a little hokey when I say it, but digital transformation and the Internet of Things and what that means when it comes to engagement. That'll just be a post. That'll be a ZDNet thing.
That is not hokey at all. All right, Natalie, what are you working on and what events will you be at?
Well, I am working on a bunch of case studies because what I'm finding is people are asking me, okay, I see all the hype and I see all the cool stuff, but how do I actually do this? So what you'll see from me is a bunch of case studies that are companies that are really disrupting business as usual, and then talking about how they did what they did and how they used the technology, both in marketing and customer service, and that merging of those two. And conferences, Infusionsoft and a CRM and a bunch of others. It's what's interesting now. There was a point in time where there were no conferences. Now there's too many conferences, and the question is, well, how am I best serving writing or attending conferences?
No problem. That's a great point. I mean, for folks listening that have a great case study or story to tell about digital disruption, transformation, marketing, we are about to unleash on the world one of the largest digital disruption case study libraries and submissions in terms of customer examples. So definitely think something to follow. Any events that you're going to be at, Natalie, in the near future?
Yeah, I think Infusionsoft, CRM Evolution, Clarabridge. There's so many that Teradata is having their analyst summit. Part of the problem I'm having is there's so many events at the same time on the same days in cities that are on different coasts. It's really hard. I need a mini-me.
You need a robot. I blame SAP for not doing their Sapphire event May 12th. That caused everybody else to choose that week and create chaos in the marketplace. But that's another story. Pete, what are you working on? What are you writing about? What's next? And where events will we see you at?
Yeah, working on an overview of marketing clouds, what matters, and how buyers are thinking about them. And I think the reality in market is a little bit different than the stories we're hearing, so that should be an interesting one. Related to that, there's an Oracle event in New York at the end of this month where they're going to make some marketing cloud announcements. So if anybody's interested in that space, keep your ears and eyes out around the end of the month for that. And then IBM Smarter Commerce taking place in Tampa. So to get IBM's take and the details on their marketing cloud development.
Great, and before I show where I'm going to be, one programming note, Courtney Sato, our Director of Brand and Community, wanted me to let you guys all know April 22nd we have Constellation office hours. You can register on the Constellation website. That's basically when you can ask any analyst anything you want, and so that's going to be there. I think for me, what I'm writing about is a wide range of things. We're finishing up a mobile SFA evaluation. We're also looking at what's going on with the future of engagement, big data business models. Events that I will be at is IBM Impact, Epicor Insights, Clarabridge, and then that's probably in the week of May 4th. I'm actually going to be home, which is a nice thing. And then the week of May 11th, there are a number of things that are going on from Gainsight, Medallion, Gainsight, TIE, and a whole bunch of other things. So lots of things happening. Hey, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Welcome.